Mara's shuttle touched down on the rocky surface of planet Terria with a soft thud. The air was thick with mist, and the sky glowed a strange shade of green. She took a deep breath inside her helmet and looked out at the alien landscape. Jagged. Cliffs rose in the distance, and twisted trees stretched toward the sky. It was beautiful, dangerous, and full of unknown creatures. Mara had been trained for this. She had visited many worlds, but Terria felt different. There was a sense of life moving just beyond sight. She stepped out of the shuttle, her boots crunching on the gravel. Her sensors picked up strange signals, small movements, and faint sounds. She was here to study the planet's wildlife, but she could already tell that surviving here would require more than just science. It would require patience, courage, and careful observation. Mara moved quietly through the rocky terrain, scanning for life. Her scanner beeped softly, detecting small heat signatures ahead. She crouched behind a large boulder and observed. There, near a narrow cliff edge, were three small creatures, huddled together. They were predators. She could tell by their sharp claws and pointed teeth, though they were only cubs. Their fur was striped in dark shades, and their eyes glowed, faintly in the dim light. They trembled, clearly scared of something. Mara's first thought was of the villagers she had met near the landing site. They were cautious and protective of their lands. Humans who had come before her often killed dangerous animals on sight, especially predators. Mara knew that if she approached the cubs openly, the villagers would assume she intended to harm them. But she did not. Her heart went out to the trembling cubs. They were too young to survive alone in this harsh world. She made a quiet decision. She would protect them. The cubs noticed her presence immediately. They hissed and bared their tiny teeth. Mara froze, keeping her movements slow and calm. She reached into her bag and took out small food packets she had brought for her research. Gently, she placed some on the ground a short distance away. One of the cubs, smaller than the others, took a tentative step forward. Mara stayed perfectly still. Minutes passed. The cubs watched her, their bodies tense but curious. The smallest one crept closer, sniffing the food. Mara's heart lifted. This small gesture of kindness was working. Slowly, she began to understand them. Each cub had its own personality. The largest one seemed protective, always standing at the edge, ready to defend the others. The middle one was restless, constantly shifting from one paw to another, eyes wide and alert. The smallest one was timid, but brave enough to investigate. Mara knew she needed to act quickly. The cliffside where the cubs hid was unstable. Rocks could fall, predators could come, or storms could strike. She needed to build them a safe place, a shelter where they could survive. But first, she had to earn their trust. For the next few hours, Mara stayed hidden behind the boulders, observing the cubs. She left small pieces of food and water, always from a distance, never forcing them to come near her. Slowly, the cubs grew less tense. Their growls softened into quiet hisses. Mara spoke to them softly, though she knew they could not understand her words. Her tone was calm and steady, meant to show that she was not a threat. As night fell, Mara returned to her shuttle to rest. She reviewed her scanner data and made plans for the next day. She would find materials to build a shelter for the cubs. Fallen branches, stones, and strong vines could be used to create a safe place for them. She knew it would be difficult, but she also knew it was possible. Mara had always believed that humans could use their intelligence and creativity to protect life, not just conquer it. The next morning, Mara returned to the cliffside. The cubs were still there, huddled together, waiting. They eyed her cautiously, but they did not run. Mara smiled under her helmet. This was a small victory, but an important one. She began collecting branches and rocks nearby. She worked quietly, moving slowly so as not to scare the cubs. She shaped a small structure in a hidden spot between two large boulders. It was simple, but sturdy enough to protect the cubs from rain, wind, and predators. Throughout the day, she worked with patience. The cubs watched her from a distance, their curiosity growing. She left food near the shelter and even tried placing it inside so they would associate the space with safety. By evening, the first small shelter was ready. Mara took a step back and admired her work. It was not perfect, but it was enough. As she rested nearby, the cubs approached the shelter cautiously. The smallest one sniffed the entrance, then slipped inside. The middle cub followed, and finally, the largest one. Mara felt a surge of relief. They had accepted her gift of protection. She knew this was only the beginning. The cubs were fragile now, but with care, they could grow strong. Mara stayed nearby through the night, keeping a watchful eye on them. In the darkness, she could hear the distant howls of other predators. She knew danger was always near on this wild planet. But she also knew that humans could make a difference. One small act of care, one decision to protect rather than destroy, could change everything. By dawn, the cubs were sleeping safely inside the shelter. Mara sat quietly outside, her mind already planning the next steps. She would need to build a larger, more secure home for them, and she would need to teach them how to survive. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had made the first connection, the first choice to protect life in a world that often seemed ready to take it away. The villagers watching from afar whispered among themselves. They could not understand Mara's intentions. In their eyes, the predator cubs were dangerous, and humans were supposed to kill them. But Mara's actions were different. She was building trust, safety, and hope. And in that quiet moment, the wild planet of Terria seemed just a little less dangerous, because one human had chosen to care. Mara smiled softly. She had arrived on Terria as an explorer, but she was beginning to understand that survival was more than just study and observation. It was about connection, empathy, and the courage to protect those who could not protect themselves. The next morning, Mara woke to the soft sounds of the alien forest. Mist curled along the rocky cliffs, and sunlight shimmered on the edges of twisted trees. She checked the shelter she had built the day before. The 3 predator cubs were inside, huddled together for warmth. The smallest cub peeked out at her with wide, cautious eyes, while the largest stayed near the back, alert and protective. The middle cub shifted restlessly, as if curious but unsure. Mara knelt quietly a few feet away and spoke softly. "Good morning, little ones. Today we will make your shelter stronger." She wanted to give them time to see she was not a threat. She set down a small tray of food outside the shelter, then retreated a few steps. The cubs hesitated, their noses twitching. Slowly, the smallest cub padded out and sniffed the food. The others followed, their movements careful and hesitant. Mara smiled. Patience was working. While the cubs ate, Mara surveyed the area. The forest around the cliff was alive with movement. She saw small flying creatures, some resembling birds but with glowing feathers, and heard distant roars that told her larger predators were nearby. Survival on this planet was not easy. The cubs' shelter was small and hidden, but it was not yet strong enough to protect them from all dangers. Mara knew she needed to expand it and make it more secure. As she gathered stronger branches and vines, Mara noticed movement at the edge of the forest. Villagers were watching her. From a distance, they whispered among themselves, their faces serious. They had heard stories of humans who killed dangerous animals to protect themselves, and they expected Mara to do the same. They could not understand why she would care for predator cubs, creatures they believed would only bring trouble. Mara ignored them, focusing on the task at hand. She had learned that people would not always understand her choices, but the cubs' lives were more important. She worked carefully, weaving vines and branches to create walls around the shelter. She built a small roof to protect against rain and added stones at the base to keep it stable. All the while, the cubs watched from a safe distance. Mara spoke to them gently, telling them what she was doing. She knew they could not understand her words, but the tone mattered. Calm and steady, it reassured them. By midday, Mara had made significant progress. The shelter was larger, stronger, and safer. She left food inside to encourage the cubs to enter. At first, they hesitated, sniffing and circling the entrance. Then, one by one, they slipped inside. Mara stayed outside, giving them space. She wanted them to feel safe and in control of their own movements. Slowly, they began exploring the new space, their small paws patting over the branches and stones. Mara spent the afternoon observing their behavior. She noticed how the largest cub acted as a protector, standing near the entrance and watching carefully. The middle cub was curious, exploring corners of the shelter, while the smallest seemed to enjoy the warmth and comfort of the hidden space. Mara realized each cub had its own personality and strengths. Understanding them would help her keep them safe. As the sun began to set, Mara returned to her shuttle to rest. She reviewed her scanner data and made notes. The planet was full of threats, from natural predators to harsh weather, but it was also full of opportunities. With careful planning, humans could protect and nurture life here. Mara was determined to do both. She felt a deep connection to the cubs. They were vulnerable, alone, and frightened, but she saw potential in them. Just as humans could thrive through intelligence and cooperation, so too could these creatures, if given the chance. During the night, Mara kept watch near the shelter. The cubs slept safely inside, their small bodies pressed together for warmth. She noticed faint footprints in the soft soil around the area. Other predators were nearby, curious about the new activity. Mara's mind worked quickly, thinking of ways to improve security. She decided she would create hidden paths and escape routes for the cubs, so they could flee safely if danger approached. Survival on Terra required thinking ahead, and Mara had learned this lesson well. The following morning, Mara returned to the shelter with more materials. She wanted to make it more comfortable and functional. She collected soft moss and alien leaves to line the floor, giving the cubs a warm and safe place to sleep. She also added more branches and rocks to reinforce the walls. The cubs watched her with cautious interest. Mara spoke softly. "This is your home now. You can trust it." Slowly, they began to explore more freely, their trust growing with each careful step. As Mara worked, the villagers observed her from the forest edge. Some whispered that she was foolish, risking herself for dangerous creatures. Others began to wonder why she did not harm the cubs, as previous humans would have done. Mara did not notice them. She focused on the cubs, their reactions, and the changes she could make to protect them. She understood that humans could be a force for good, using intelligence and care rather than violence. By midday, Mara had completed the improvements. The shelter was now a small but strong structure, hidden among rocks and trees. It had a soft interior, reinforced walls, and a small opening for the cubs to exit safely. Mara stepped back and watched. The cubs approached cautiously. The smallest. One entered first, then the middle, and finally the largest. They explored the new space carefully, sniffing and pawing at the interior. Mara smiled under her helmet. It was working. They were beginning to trust her. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed from the forest. The cubs froze, their ears flattening against their heads. Mara moved quickly, stepping between them and the entrance. A large predator appeared at the edge of the trees, its eyes focused on the cubs. Mara stayed calm, holding her ground. She knew that fear could make the situation worse. Slowly, the large predator retreated, distracted by movement elsewhere. The cubs relaxed, huddling close to Mara. She spoke softly, reassuring them. As evening approached, Mara reflected on the day. The cubs were no longer completely afraid of her. They had begun to trust her, exploring the shelter and responding to her gentle voice. Mara knew it would take time for them to fully accept her, but this was a good start. She also knew that humans had a role to play on Terria, not as destroyers, but as protectors and helpers. The villagers, watching from a distance, whispered among themselves. They were confused. Mara had risked herself to protect predator cubs. They could not understand why she would do this. Slowly, some began to see that humans could be more than they expected. They could be intelligent, compassionate, and brave. Mara had begun to change their perception, one careful action at a time. As night fell, Mara stayed near the shelter, keeping a watchful eye on the cubs. They were safe, warm, and slowly learning to trust. Mara felt a sense of accomplishment, but she knew the work had just begun. There were challenges ahead, dangers to face, and lessons to teach. But for the first time, the predator cubs had a chance to survive, and Mara had found her purpose on Terria. Mara woke to a soft morning light filtering through the alien trees. Mist curled over the rocky cliffs, and the air smelled fresh after a light rain. She looked at the small shelter she had built for the predator cubs. Inside, the three creatures were slowly waking, stretching their tiny legs and yawning. The smallest cub's eyes met hers for a brief moment, a flicker of curiosity showing in its gaze. Mara smiled under her helmet. Today she would work on earning more of their trust. She approached the shelter slowly, keeping her movements calm and predictable. Mara knew that sudden gestures or loud sounds could frighten the cubs, undoing all the progress she had made. She laid out small portions of food near the entrance and then stepped back. The smallest cub padded forward first, sniffing cautiously at the offerings. The middle cub followed, more curious than cautious, while the largest stayed slightly behind, keeping watch. Mara spoke softly, her voice calm and steady. "This is safe. You can come out when you're ready." The cubs lingered at the entrance for a while, watching her movements. Mara took a seat a few feet away, keeping her body low and non-threatening. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small brush she had brought for her equipment. Gently, she brushed a few leaves and dirt from the ground near the shelter, keeping her actions slow and deliberate. The cubs tilted their heads, observing her every move. Mara understood that patience would be her greatest tool. Over the next few hours, Mara worked quietly, reinforcing the shelter with extra branches and vines. She added a small hidden exit at the back, in case danger approached. The cubs crept closer as she worked, their curiosity growing. The smallest cub, braver than the others, stepped near her, sniffing at her hands. Mara remained still, letting it explore. When the cub's nose touched her glove, she smiled softly and whispered, "Good. You are safe here." The middle cub began to approach next, following the smallest one's lead. It circled her slowly, sniffing and tapping the ground with its paws. Mara could see the flicker of trust beginning to form. The largest cub, still cautious, remained near the shelter entrance, its eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Mara knew it would take longer for this one to trust her, but she also knew it would happen if she continued to act with patience and care. By midday, Mara had completed several improvements to the shelter. She lined the interior with soft moss and leaves, creating a warm, safe space for the cubs to rest. She left small trays of food inside and outside so the cubs could explore without feeling pressured. Slowly, they began to enter the shelter one by one. The smallest and middle cubs ventured inside, sniffing and pawing at the new space. The largest cub lingered, finally stepping in when it felt safe. Mara sat nearby, watching with quiet satisfaction as Mara worked. She noticed signs of other predators in the area. Tracks in the soft soil showed that larger creatures had passed through the cliffs overnight. Mara knew the cubs would not survive without protection. She decided to spend extra time, teaching them to recognize danger and find safe paths. Using gentle movements and gestures, she encouraged the cubs to explore the shelter and the surrounding area. Slowly, they began to understand that she was not a threat, but a guide and protector. The villagers continued to observe from a distance. Some whispered in disbelief, unable to understand why Mara would risk herself for dangerous cubs. Others watched silently, curiosity replacing suspicion. They had always seen humans as hunters and conquerors, but Mara's actions were different. She was intelligent, careful, and patient. She was showing them a new way of interacting with the wild creatures of Teria. In the afternoon, Mara led the bay cubs to a small clearing near the shelter. She used soft tones to encourage them forward, letting them explore at their own pace. The cubs hesitated at first, but Mara's calm presence reassured them. They sniffed the ground, investigated the area, and began to playfully chase small insects. Mara watched with a sense of wonder. Even in the wild, these creatures could learn and adapt, given the right guidance and protection. During this time, Mara also noticed the cubs' personalities becoming clearer. The smallest cub was brave and curious, often the first to approach her and explore new areas. The middle cub was playful and intelligent, learning quickly from observation. The largest cub was cautious and protective, always scanning the surroundings for potential threats. Mara realized that understanding their personalities would be key to keeping them safe and helping them grow strong. As evening approached, Mara prepared the shelter for the night. She left extra food and water, reinforced the walls with stronger branches, and ensured that the hidden exit was clear. The cubs settled inside, curling together for warmth. Mara stayed nearby, watching over them as darkness fell. The forest. Around them was alive with sounds, roars, calls, and movements. But the cubs were safe within the shelter. Mara's heart swelled with pride. She had begun to earn their trust, and they had begun to understand her care. Night on Teria was quiet, but full of life. Mara kept watch, listening to the sounds of distant predators. She knew that danger could come at any time, but she also knew that the cubs were learning to rely on her guidance. They had begun to trust not only her, but also the idea that humans could be protectors, not just destroyers. By the following morning, Mara had created a small routine. She would prepare food, reinforce the shelter, and lead the cubs on short explorations. Each day, their trust grew a little more. The smallest cub would approach her first, brushing against her legs or sniffing her hands. The middle cub followed, more cautious but playful. The largest cub, though still wary, would now step out of the shelter and observe Mara's actions closely. Trust was building slowly, but it was strong. Mara reflected on her work and the lessons she had learned. The cubs were more than just creatures to study. They were beings with intelligence, emotion, and the capacity to learn. Mara realized that humans had a responsibility to protect life, especially when it was vulnerable. Her presence on Teria was not just about exploration, it was about understanding, empathy, and survival through care. The villagers, still watching from a distance, began to murmur among themselves. Some were confused, others skeptical, but a few began to see the changes. Mara's patience and intelligence were clear. She was not harming the cubs. She was teaching them, protecting them, and giving them a chance to survive. Slowly, the villagers' view of humans began to shift. Mara was not just another human visitor. She was a protector and a teacher. As night fell again, Mara stayed by the shelter, keeping watch over the cubs. They were safe, warm, and beginning to trust her presence. Mara felt a sense of accomplishment, but she knew there was more work ahead. The world was dangerous, and survival required more than just shelter. It required guidance, intelligence, and courage. Mara was ready for the challenge. She looked at the sleeping cubs and whispered softly, "You are safe now. I will protect you, and together we will survive." The cubs, in their small way, seemed to understand. Mara smiled, knowing that trust had been built and the bond between human and predator had begun. The morning on Terria started quietly, with soft light filtering through the alien trees. Mara checked the predator cubs inside their shelter. Nilo, the smallest cub, was awake, stretching his tiny legs. Fira, the middle cub, pawed at the soft moss lining the floor, while Keen, the largest cub, watched the surroundings carefully. Mara smiled. Each day the cubs grew stronger, braver, and more curious. She stepped outside to survey the area. The sky, which had been a gentle green earlier, was slowly turning darker. Clouds thickened, swirling above the cliffs in ominous patterns. Mara's scanner picked up sudden shifts in air pressure. A storm was coming. She knew that heavy rain and strong winds could destroy the cubs' shelter and put their lives in danger. She had to act quickly. Mara gathered extra branches, rocks, and vines. She reinforced the shelter walls, making them thicker and more stable. She added additional support beams and tightened the vines holding the roof together. The cubs watched from inside, curious but cautious. Mara spoke to them softly. "Stay here. This will keep you safe." She wanted them to understand that danger was near, but she was in control. By mid-morning, dark clouds covered the sky completely. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and a cold wind began to blow. Mara worked faster, securing the last loose branches and checking the stability of the shelter's hidden exit. The cubs' ears twitched at each sound, and they huddled together, inside, trembling slightly. Mara felt a surge of determination. They were counting on her, and she would not let them down. The storm hit suddenly in the early afternoon. Rain fell in heavy sheets, pounding against the shelter and the rocky cliffs. Wind howled through the trees, bending them dangerously. Mara crouched beside the entrance, making sure the cubs were safe and dry. Water began to seep in from one side, and Mara quickly placed rocks to block the flow. She worked tirelessly, her hands moving with speed and precision. Nilo, the smallest cub, whimpered softly. Mara reached inside, gently stroking his fur. "It's okay," she whispered. "You are safe. I will keep you safe." Fira and Keen relaxed slightly as they felt Mara's calm presence. Trust, which had taken days to build, now helped them remain calmer in the storm. Mara realized that their bond was more than just curiosity. It was mutual understanding and reliance. The storm worsened. A loud crack of thunder echoed across the cliffs, startling the cubs. Mara held her ground, speaking softly and moving slowly so they would not panic. Rainwater began pooling around the shelter, but Mara had prepared for this. She guided the cubs to the slightly raised interior, keeping them dry. She used her body to shield them from the wind and rain as best she could. Hours passed. The storm showed no sign of slowing. Mara's muscles ached from the constant work, but she refused to leave the cubs unprotected. She checked the hidden exit, making sure it was secure, and reinforced weak spots in the shelter walls. Every now and then, she gave the cubs small portions of food and water, keeping their strength up. The cubs, sensing her determination, began to calm down. They leaned against her as they had come to trust her guidance completely. By evening, the storm reached its peak. Trees bent dangerously, and rocks slid from the cliffs. Mara stayed vigilant, watching the surrounding area for any additional threats. She knew that predators could take advantage of the chaos, but the shelter's location and her careful planning kept the cubs hidden. Mara whispered reassuring words constantly, keeping their fears at bay. Her voice was calm, strong, and steady, guiding them through the dangerous night. As the storm began to subside late in the night, Mara finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The cubs were safe, huddled together inside the shelter. Nilo rested his head against her arm. Fira's small body was tucked into the moss, and Keen lay near the entrance, still alert but relaxed. Mara felt a quiet pride. She had built more than just a physical shelter. She had built trust, protection, and a sense of security for the cubs. The following morning, Teria was transformed. The rain had washed the cliff's clean, small streams, ran through the rocky terrain, and the forest glistened with moisture. Mara stepped outside the shelter to assess the damage. Some branches had broken, but the main structure had held firm. Her careful planning and preparation had saved the cubs' lives. She smiled, knowing that humans could use intelligence and foresight to overcome challenges even in the wildest conditions. The cubs emerged slowly from the shelter, shaking off water from their fur. They looked at Mara with wide eyes, a mixture of relief and gratitude in their gaze. Nilo nuzzled her hand, Fira pawed gently at her boots, and Keen gave a small, approving growl. Mara laughed softly, feeling a deep connection with the creatures she had vowed to protect. They had survived the storm together, and their bond had grown stronger because of it. From the cliffs above, Mara noticed the villagers watching again. This time their expressions were different. Some were shocked, others were impressed. They had seen her protect the cubs through the storm, facing danger and exhaustion without hesitation. Slowly, they began to understand that humans were not always destroyers. They could also be protectors, using intelligence, care, and courage to preserve life. Mara did not need their approval, but she felt that her actions were beginning to change their perspective. After ensuring the cubs were fed and rested, Mara began repairing minor damage to the shelter. She replaced broken branches, secured loose vines, and reinforced the roof further. The cubs watched her work, exploring the surrounding area carefully. Mara encouraged them to test the ground and practice climbing over safe rocks. The storm had been a challenge, but it had also been a lesson. The cubs learned resilience, while Mara learned the power of patience and preparation. By the evening, the shelter was stronger than ever. Mara sat outside, watching the cubs playfully chase each other, their energy returning after the storm. Nilo leaped onto a small rock, Fira darted behind a tree, and Keen pounced gently on a fallen branch. Mara smiled, realizing that the cubs were not only surviving but thriving. Her guidance and protection had given them the chance to grow strong and confident in a dangerous world. As night fell on Teria, Mara reflected on the day's events. The storm had tested her skills, her courage, and her determination. It had also strengthened the bond between her and the cubs. They had faced fear together and emerged stronger. Mara knew that challenges would continue to come, but she also knew that humans had the ability to make a difference. By combining intelligence, courage, and care, they could protect life and create harmony even in the wildest conditions. The cubs settled into the shelter for the night, safe and warm. Mara stayed nearby, keeping watch and speaking softly to them. Her heart was calm, her mind alert, and her spirit ready for the adventures that lay ahead. The storm had passed, but the lessons it brought would remain. Mara had proven to herself and to the cubs that humans could be protectors, builders, and friends even in a world full of danger. The morning after the storm, Teria was calm and quiet. The alien forest sparkled with water droplets from the night's rain, and the sun's greenish light filtered gently through the trees. Mara checked on the cubs inside their shelter. Nilo, the smallest, stretched and yawned. Fira pawed at the soft moss, her curiosity renewed after the storm. Keen, the largest, remained alert, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Mara smiled. The cubs had survived the storm, and now it was time to teach them even more about survival. Mara prepared a small breakfast of food and water for the cubs. She placed it near the shelter's entrance, giving them space to eat comfortably. Nilo stepped forward first, sniffing the offerings. Fira followed, and then Keen, who paused briefly before approaching. Mara spoke softly, reassuring them with her calm tone. The cubs were learning to trust her more each day. They knew that she provided safety and nourishment, and that they could rely on her guidance. As the cubs ate, Mara noticed movement at the edge of the forest. She froze, scanning carefully with her eyes and her handheld scanner. 3 figures emerged from the trees. They were villagers, carrying nets and ropes. Mara's heart raced. She had anticipated their curiosity, but not that they would attempt to capture the cubs. The villagers believed the cubs were dangerous and thought Mara was hiding them for harmful purposes. She had to act carefully to protect the cubs without causing a confrontation. Mara moved quietly to a position where she could observe the villagers without being seen. She whispered to the cubs, "Stay inside. Be quiet. Do not come out until I say it is safe." The cubs pressed against each other, listening to her words. They understood her tone, and they obeyed. Mara began thinking of a plan to distract the villagers and keep the cubs safe. The villagers advanced cautiously, nets at the ready. Mara noticed that they were unaware of the small hidden paths around the shelter. She had prepared these after the storm, anticipating that danger could approach. Using the terrain to her advantage, she created small movements and sounds from the opposite direction, drawing the villagers' attention away from the shelter. Rocks tumbled down the cliffside, and branches snapped under her careful manipulation. The villagers looked toward the noise, giving Mara the opportunity she needed. Quickly and silently, Mara used another hidden path to approach the shelter from the back. The cubs stayed calm, watching her movements. She reinforced the shelter's entrance with extra vines and rocks, creating a barrier that would prevent the villagers from entering. The cubs peeked through small openings, curious and cautious. Mara smiled. They were learning that she could protect them, and that she would act to keep them safe no matter the threat. The villagers, now realizing that the noise was a distraction, returned to investigate. Mara stayed hidden, observing their movements. She noticed that they were growing frustrated. They had expected an easy capture, but Mara had anticipated them. Using small signs and careful positioning of objects, she guided the villagers further away from the shelter. They began to tire, confused by the terrain and Mara's clever distractions. Mara decided it was time to show the cubs another lesson. She led them through a small path behind the shelter, guiding them to a safe clearing away from the villagers. Nilo followed first, stepping carefully over small rocks. Fira stayed close, learning from each movement. Keen brought up the rear, his protective instincts alert but trusting Mara's guidance. They reached the clearing safely, and Mara praised them softly. "Good. You stayed safe and followed me. That is very important." The villagers, seeing the cubs disappear from view, grew even more suspicious. They whispered among themselves, questioning Mara's intentions. Some of them began to doubt their assumptions about humans. Mara had not harmed the cubs, she had only guided them to safety. Slowly, some villagers began to realize that humans could act with intelligence, care, and foresight, not just force. Mara knew that actions spoke louder than words, and this was an important lesson for both the cubs and the villagers. Mara spent the afternoon teaching the cubs basic survival skills. She guided them over small rocks, showed them how to find safe water sources, and instructed them on hiding techniques. The cubs followed her movements carefully, imitating her actions. Nilo learned quickly, darting through the trees with excitement. Fira observed and adapted, her playful energy turning into cautious intelligence. Keen, still cautious, began to understand the strategies Mara was teaching. They were learning from her not only how to survive, but also how to trust and follow guidance. As the sun began to set, Mara led the cubs back to their shelter using the hidden paths she had prepared. The cubs moved confidently, understanding the route and the safety it provided. Mara reinforced the shelter once more, ensuring it was secure for the night. She left small trays of food and water and spoke softly to the cubs. "You did very well today. You listened, you followed, and you stayed safe. That is very important." The cubs settled inside the shelter, curling together for warmth. Mara stayed nearby, watching the surrounding forest for any signs of danger. The villagers had returned to the forest edge, observing from a distance. They were silent, unsure of what to do next. Mara's intelligence, calmness, and careful actions had prevented any conflict and kept the cubs safe. Slowly, some of the villagers began to understand that humans could be protectors and teachers, not just hunters. That night, Mara reflected on the day's events. The cubs had faced a new type of danger, the humans who were supposed to protect the land. Mara had guided them through it safely, teaching them trust, caution, and obedience. She realized that her role was becoming more important every day. She was not only their protector, but also their teacher and guide. The bond between them had grown stronger, and the cubs were learning that humans could be allies. Mara whispered to the sleeping cubs, "You are safe now. No one can harm you while I am here. We will face challenges together, and we will survive." The cubs responded in their small way, curling closer together and pressing against her hands. Mara smiled, feeling a deep connection. The events of the day had shown her that loyalty, trust, and intelligence were stronger than force or fear. The villagers, observing from afar, had also witnessed Mara's actions. Some began to whisper in admiration, realizing that humans could act differently than they expected. Mara had proven that care, planning, and patience could save lives. The cubs were alive, learning, and thriving because of her guidance. Slowly, the villagers' perception of humans began to shift. As night fell on Teria, Mara stayed vigilant, keeping watch over the cubs. They were safe inside the shelter, protected from danger, and learning how to survive in a wild, unpredictable world. Mara knew there would be more tests ahead, but she was ready. The cubs had learned that she would protect them, and she had learned that humans could change the world through intelligence, courage, and care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Mara felt confident. She had passed the first true test of loyalty, both for herself and for the cubs. And in the quiet night under the greenish glow of Teria's sky, she knew that their bond was unbreakable. Together, they could face anything. The days on Teria passed with steady rhythm. Mara checked the predator cubs every morning, observing their growth and guiding them carefully. Nilo, the smallest cub, had become braver, venturing further from the shelter each day. Fira, the middle cub, grew cleverer, learning quickly from both Mara and Nilo. Keen, the largest, remained protective but had begun to trust Mara more fully. The bond between them strengthened with each shared moment of care, teaching, and survival. Mara decided it was time to teach the cubs more advanced skills. She wanted them to learn not only how to survive, but also how to navigate the world of Teria safely. The first lesson was climbing. Mara led them to a set of jagged cliffs nearby, gentle enough for practice, but challenging enough to test their agility. She demonstrated careful movements first, climbing a small ledge and showing them how to find stable footholds. Nilo watched closely and was the first to try. His small paws found grip, and with Mara's encouragement, he scaled the ledge quickly. Fira followed, pausing when she found unstable rocks, learning from Mara's calm guidance. Keen observed the two, then carefully began his climb, showing patience and caution. Mara praised each step, reinforcing the trust and understanding they had built. The cubs began to see her not only as protector, but as a teacher whose guidance could lead them to safety. Back at the shelter, Mara reinforced their home further. She added thicker branches and hidden layers of vines to protect against predators and harsh weather. She also created small hiding spots for the cubs to practice moving quietly and staying unseen. Nilo explored eagerly, Fira tested her skills, and Keen remained watchful, always alert to Mara's instructions. The cubs were learning quickly, and Mara felt pride in their progress. One afternoon, as Mara guided the cubs on an exploration of nearby forests, she noticed signs of other humans approaching. Villagers had come to investigate once again, curious about the cubs' safety and Mara's unusual actions. This time, however, Mara felt confident. She had prepared escape routes and hiding paths for the cubs, allowing them to practice moving quietly and staying safe without panic. Mara whispered to the cubs, "Stay calm, follow me, and you will be safe." Nilo, Fira, and Keen obeyed immediately, moving along the hidden paths Mara had created. The villagers searched the area, confused by the cubs' sudden disappearance. Mara guided them to safety, showing them that intelligence and preparation were more effective than fear or force. The cubs learned that staying calm, observing and following guidance could protect them in dangerous situations. The villagers, watching from a distance, began to murmur among themselves. Some were impressed, realizing that Mara's approach was different from previous humans. She did not harm the cubs. She taught them, guided them, and protected them. Slowly, their perspective began to shift. Mara's actions were not only about survival, they were about intelligence, care, and responsibility. Over the next several days, Mara continued training the cubs. She taught them to recognize signs of danger, to move quietly through the forest, and to use the environment to their advantage. Nilo's courage grew steadily, Fira's intelligence sharpened, and Keen's protective instincts became stronger and more precise. Each cub contributed uniquely to their small group, and Mara guided them to understand how their individual strengths could help all of them survive together. One evening, as Mara observed the cubs playing near the shelter, she noticed a new development. Small predators had been watching from the trees. Mara knew that this was an opportunity to teach the cubs about caution and awareness. She led them through a practice exercise, guiding them to observe quietly, stay hidden, and avoid drawing attention. The cubs followed her carefully, learning to blend into their surroundings while staying calm under pressure. Mara's teachings were taking root. The villagers continued to watch, now more quietly. They had witnessed Mara's protection of the cubs, her guidance, and her intelligence. Slowly, a few began to consider the possibility that humans could act as protectors and teachers rather than threats. Mara did not confront them. She continued her work quietly, knowing that her actions spoke louder than words. As night fell, Mara sat outside the shelter observing the cubs as they settled down. Nilo curled against her leg, Fira nestled in the moss, and Keen lay at the entrance, keeping a protective watch. Mara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The cubs were stronger, safer, and learning the skills they would need to survive on Terria. More importantly, they were learning trust, patience, and the power of cooperation. The following morning, Mara introduced a new lesson. She wanted the cubs to learn about problem solving. She set up small obstacles and challenges in a safe area, encouraging the cubs to navigate around them, find hidden treats, and work together. Nilo quickly learned to think ahead. Fira used clever strategies to reach the treats, and Keen applied his strength and caution to guide the others. Mara watched proudly. The cubs were becoming capable and confident under her guidance. By midday, Mara reflected on how far the cubs had come. They had survived storms, learned to trust her, evaded human hunters, and developed essential skills for survival. Mara realized that humans could make a difference in the world not by domination, but by careful planning, care, and teaching. The cubs were living proof that patience and intelligence could nurture life even in the wildest and most dangerous environments. As the sun began to set, Mara prepared the shelter for the night. She left extra food and water and checked the surrounding area for safety. The cubs followed her instructions perfectly, moving calmly and confidently. Mara smiled under her helmet. Each day they grew stronger, braver, and smarter. Each day they learned the value of trust and guidance. The villagers, still observing from afar, whispered among themselves. Some were now in awe of Mara's patience, intelligence, and care. They had never seen a human act with such dedication to creatures others considered dangerous. Slowly, their perception of humans was changing. Mara had shown them that humans could be protectors, teachers, and friends. That night, Mara stayed near the shelter, watching over the cubs as they slept. Nilo, Fira, and Keen were safe, warm, and learning to trust both her and the world around them. Mara knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she felt confident. The cubs were growing stronger, and their bond with her had deepened. Together they could face whatever Teria presented. Mara whispered softly to the sleeping cubs, "You are strong, you are brave, and you are safe. Together, we will survive." The cubs responded in their own small ways, curling closer together and pressing against Mara's hands. She smiled, knowing that her efforts were creating a future where humans and creatures could coexist through trust, care, and understanding. The morning on Teria was calm and quiet, but Mara sensed that today would be different. The predator cubs had grown stronger over the past weeks. Nilo, the smallest, was now quick and brave. Fira, the middle cub, had grown clever and alert. Keen, the largest, remained protective but confident in his abilities. Mara had trained them well, but she knew that true survival required facing unexpected challenges. As they moved near the shelter, Mara noticed unusual signs. Tracks of larger predators were fresh in the soft soil. These were not ordinary forest creatures. They were fast, powerful, and dangerous. Mara realized that the cubs would face their first real test of survival outside the shelter. She spoke softly to them. "Stay close. Listen to me. And remember what I taught you. We will face this together." The cubs responded in their small ways, nuzzling her hands and pressing close for reassurance. Mara led them through hidden paths she had carefully mapped. Nilo moved quickly, following Mara's instructions without hesitation. Fira observed her surroundings and used clever paths to avoid open areas. Keen scanned constantly, keeping an alert watch over the group. Mara felt pride and relief. Her guidance had prepared them well. Suddenly, the forest erupted with movement. A large predator, one of the strongest Mara had seen, appeared ahead of them. Its roar shook the surrounding trees, and its eyes locked on the cubs. Mara froze briefly, then guided the cubs behind a dense cluster of rocks. "Stay quiet," she whispered. The cubs obeyed, crouching low and holding still. Mara's heart pounded, but her mind was sharp. She had planned for moments like this. Using the terrain to her advantage, Mara created a diversion. She tossed a small rock in a different direction, drawing the predator's attention away. The creature growled, but followed the noise, giving the cubs a chance to move. Mara led them carefully through narrow paths and over rocky slopes, guiding them step by step. The cubs followed her precisely, moving quietly and confidently. After several tense minutes, they reached a safer area, a hidden clearing surrounded by dense trees and elevated rocks. Mara reinforced the space with branches and vines, creating temporary cover. She allowed the cubs to rest and catch their breath. Nilo wagged his tail slightly, Fira pawed the ground playfully, and Keen exhaled slowly, relieved. Mara whispered encouragement to each of them, reinforcing their trust and confidence. The predator returned, circling the outer edge of the clearing. Mara knew it could attack again, so she devised another plan. Using her knowledge of the terrain, she guided the cubs to climb to higher rocks, moving silently and staying hidden. The predator prowled below, unaware of their exact location. Mara instructed the cubs to stay still and wait. They crouched, breathing quietly, trusting her guidance completely. Hours passed as the predator searched without success. Mara took the opportunity to teach the cubs another lesson: observation. She pointed to subtle signs in the environment: the movement of leaves, changes in soil, distant sounds, showing them how to detect danger before it arrived. The cubs watched intently, learning to anticipate threats and react without panic. Mara knew these skills could save their lives in the future. As evening approached, the predator finally left, moving deeper into the forest. Mara guided the cubs back to their shelter using hidden paths, ensuring they remained unseen. Nilo and Fira moved quickly, eager to return, while Keen took extra care, making sure the route was safe. Mara felt relief as they reached the shelter intact. The cubs had survived their first true test outside, guided by her careful planning and teaching. Back at the shelter, Mara prepared a safe resting space. She laid out soft moss and leaves, and the cubs curled together for warmth. Mara sat nearby, watching them. "You did very well today," she whispered. "You listened, stayed calm, and trusted each other and me. That is how you survive." The cubs responded with gentle nuzzles and soft noises, showing their comfort and trust. Mara smiled. She had not only protected them, but also taught them the skills they needed to survive in a dangerous world. The villagers, observing from a distance, had witnessed the events. Some were amazed, others thoughtful. They saw how Mara had protected the cubs without using force, how she had guided them through danger, and how the cubs had learned to survive with intelligence and patience. Slowly, the villagers began to understand that humans could act differently than expected. Mara had shown that care, planning, and teaching could be as powerful as strength and weapons. Over the next few days, Mara continued to train the cubs, reinforcing lessons of survival, observation, and trust. She guided them through small challenges, teaching teamwork and clever strategies. Nilo's courage grew daily, Fira's intelligence sharpened, and Keen's protective instincts became even stronger. Together, they learned that strength alone was not enough. Wisdom, patience, and cooperation were equally important. One morning, Mara led the cubs to a wider part of the forest where the villagers had never ventured. She demonstrated safe ways to explore while avoiding danger. Nilo darted between trees. Fira used clever routes to find hidden paths, and Keen kept watch. Mara encouraged them at every step, reinforcing the lessons of the past weeks. The cubs were no longer dependent solely on her. They were learning to think, adapt, and survive on their own. That evening, Mara sat outside the shelter, watching the cubs play under the greenish light of Terria's sky. Nilo tumbled over a small branch, Fira leaped onto a rock, and Keen pounced gently on a fallen log. Mara smiled, seeing the result of weeks of care, teaching, and trust-building. The cubs had grown stronger, braver, and more intelligent. They had survived storms, evaded hunters, and faced dangerous predators. They were ready for the challenges of Teria. The villagers, still observing, now whispered among themselves with admiration. They had seen Mara's patience, courage, and intelligence. They realized that humans could be protectors, teachers, and friends to creatures previously thought dangerous. Mara's example had changed their perspective. Her actions proved that humans could act with wisdom and care, creating harmony rather than fear. As night fell, Mara stayed near the shelter, keeping watch over the cubs. Nilo, Fira, and Keen were safe, warm, and confident. Mara reflected on the journey. She had come to Teria as an explorer, but she had become a protector, a teacher, and a friend. The cubs had survived because of her guidance, and the villagers had begun to understand the value of intelligence, care, and trust. Mara whispered softly to the cubs, "You are strong, brave, and safe. Together, we have faced danger and learned to survive. Remember these lessons, and you will thrive." The cubs responded gently, pressing close to her hands, their small bodies relaxed and trusting. Mara smiled, knowing that her mission was a success. She had proven that humans could make a difference, not by force, but through protection, teaching, and understanding. The green skies of Teria stretched above them, calm and peaceful. The cubs slept soundly, safe within their shelter. Mara kept watch through the night, proud of their growth and the bond they shared. The challenges they had faced had tested strength, patience, and courage, and together they had triumphed. Mara knew that the cubs would continue to grow strong, learning from her guidance and the lessons of Teria's wild, beautiful world. For the first time, Mara felt complete peace. The cubs were alive, safe, and capable. The villagers had seen the value of intelligence, patience, and care. Mara had fulfilled her purpose on Teria, not just as an explorer, but as a protector and teacher. In the quiet night, surrounded by the sounds of the forest, she knew that humans could truly make the world a better place, one life at a time.